I lived in a quiet neighborhood with my husband, Raj. Our life was simple and happy. I enjoyed cooking, taking care of our home, and spending time with Raj. We were close to our neighbors, and everyone seemed kind. Life felt easy and peaceful. One day, everything changed. A new neighbor moved in next door. Her name was Anita. She was friendly and had a bright smile. She introduced herself to everyone, including Raj and me. At first, I thought nothing of it. New people often came and went in the area. But soon, I started noticing strange things. Anita seemed very interested in Raj. At first, she only said small things like how nice he was or how lucky I must be. These words made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but I told myself it was normal. Maybe she was just a kind person. One evening, something happened that made my heart sink. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Through the window, I saw Anita walk into our garden. She was carrying a plate of cookies. She handed them to Raj and stood talking to him for a long time. I wanted to go outside, but I stayed in the kitchen. My hands were shaking. Why didn't she bring the cookies to both of us? Why only to Raj? I felt a knot in my stomach, but I said nothing. After that, Anita started appearing more often. She would wave at Raj from her garden. When Raj went out to water our plants, Anita was always there to start a conversation. I tried to join them sometimes, but Anita always found a way to talk to Raj alone. It felt like she was waiting for moments when I was busy or away. A few days later, I noticed something strange. Anita started dressing like me. She wore similar clothes, colors, and even the same hairstyle I had chosen for a party last week. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe she liked my style. But then I saw her at the market buying the same kind of dress I had worn recently. It didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It felt wrong. I tried to ignore these small things, but they started adding up. Anita joined the yoga class I had been attending for months. She always made sure to sit near Raj and smiled at him often. She started coming over to our house, borrowing small things like sugar or milk. Each time she stayed longer, talking to Raj, laughing at his jokes, and acting like she belonged. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. Raj thought Anita was just being nice. He didn't see what I saw. I felt alone, like no one could understand what I was feeling. Even when I told a friend about it, they said I was overthinking. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was imagining everything. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The breaking point came one evening. Raj and I had planned to go out for dinner. As I was getting ready, I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, there was Anita, standing with a small gift in her hand. She said she wanted to thank Raj for helping her fix her garden fence earlier that day. I didn't even know Raj had done that. She handed the gift to him directly and didn't even look at me. My chest felt heavy. It was like I wasn't there. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the way Anita looked at Raj, the way she acted around him. It wasn't normal. It wasn't friendly. It felt like she was trying to come closer to him, to take something that wasn't hers. I started watching Anita more closely after that. I couldn't help myself. Every time she came near Raj, I felt like I had to be there, to protect what was mine. But the more I watched, the more uneasy I felt. She wasn't just being nice, she was trying to get between us. I was sure of it now. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Raj didn't see what I saw. He thought I was imagining things. My friends didn't believe me either. I felt trapped. I couldn't prove that Anita had bad intentions, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my heart. Each day, the tension grew. Each time Anita came near Raj, I felt like I was losing him little by little. I didn't know how to stop her, but I knew I had to try. My peaceful life was slipping away, and I couldn't let that happen. Days passed, and Anita's actions became harder to ignore. She seemed to be everywhere. If Raj and I went for a walk, Anita would suddenly appear, smiling and saying she was out for some fresh air. If I went to the market, I would see her buying the same things I had mentioned liking before. It was as if she was following me and copying my life. One morning, I saw something that made my heart ache. Anita was sitting on her porch, wearing a dress that looked almost exactly like one I owned. She waved to Raj as he left for work. I stayed inside, watching from the window. It felt like she was showing me that she could take anything I had, even the smallest things. I tried to push these thoughts away. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. Raj and I went to a small gathering at a neighbor's house. It was a casual event with food and music. When we arrived, Anita was already there. She walked straight to Raj, offering him a plate of snacks. She laughed at everything he said, even things that weren't funny. I stayed close to Raj, but Anita found ways to keep his attention. When I tried to join the conversation, she would talk over me. I felt invisible. Later that evening, I noticed she was sitting in Raj's chair while he talked to someone else. It was a small thing, but it felt like she was trying to take his space, to make it hers. At home, I couldn't stop thinking about Anita. I started questioning myself. Was I not good enough? Did Raj like the attention Anita gave him? I hated these thoughts, but they wouldn't leave me. Every time I tried to relax, something reminded me of Anita. One day, I decided to go for a yoga class. It was something I enjoyed, a way to clear my mind. But when I arrived, Anita was there. She smiled at me like everything was normal, but I felt uneasy. She placed her mat close to mine, even though there was plenty of space. During the class, she kept looking over at me, copying my movements. I felt like I couldn't escape her, even in a place that was supposed to bring me peace. The next time I saw Anita, she was in her garden. She had planted the same flowers that I had in mine. I stared at her for a moment, wondering if she was doing this on purpose. Did she want my life so badly that she had to copy everything I did? I felt angry and confused, but I didn't know what to say or do. Things got worse when Anita started coming to our house more often. She always had a reason, like asking for cooking advice or borrowing small things. But every visit felt like an excuse to spend time with Raj. She would compliment him, telling him how kind and helpful he was. I felt like screaming, but I stayed silent. Raj didn't seem to notice anything wrong. To him, Anita was just a friendly neighbor. One evening, I walked into the living room and found Anita sitting with Raj, laughing. She had brought over a recipe she said she wanted to try, and Raj was helping her with it. I stood in the doorway, frozen. That recipe was one I had taught Raj years ago. Now Anita was pretending it was hers. I felt like she was stealing parts of my life, piece by piece. I tried to talk to Raj about it later, but he didn't understand. He said Anita was just being nice, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. I felt like I was losing him, like he couldn't see what I was seeing. I wanted to cry, but I held it in. I didn't want Anita to know how much she was hurting me. The days started to feel heavier. Everywhere I looked, Anita was there, smiling, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape her. It felt like she was in my home, my garden, my life. I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless. All I wanted was to protect my marriage, my happiness. But Anita was making that harder and harder. One night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I needed to understand why Anita was doing this. I needed to know what she wanted and how to stop her. I couldn't let her take what was mine. I had to find a way to protect everything I loved. With that thought, I fell asleep, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I had spent so much time feeling confused and angry, but now I knew I needed to act. I decided to watch Anita closely. If she wanted to take my place, I had to find out why. There was something strange about the way she acted, and I was determined to figure it out. I started by paying attention to everything she did. Whenever she came to our house, I made sure to stay nearby. I wanted to see how she behaved when she thought I wasn't looking. Anita always seemed polite and cheerful, but there was something fake about her smile. It was like she was playing a role, pretending to be someone she wasn't. One day, I noticed Anita standing near our garden wall. She was talking to another neighbor, but her eyes kept drifting toward our house. She looked at Raj's car, at the plants I had carefully grown, and even at the window where I liked to sit in the mornings. It felt like she was studying every detail of my life. My heart sank. This wasn't just curiosity. It was something else, something much darker. A few days later, I saw Anita at the market. She was buying the same vegetables I had told Raj were my favorites. She even picked up the same brand of tea I always drank. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was copying me on purpose. It was like she wanted to erase the differences between us, to become me in every way. The more I watched Anita, the more patterns I noticed. She always seemed to be around when Raj was home. If he went outside to water the plants, Anita would suddenly appear, pretending to look for her cat or take out the trash. She made everything seem accidental, but I knew better. These weren't accidents. She was planning every move. One afternoon, I was cleaning the living room when I noticed something unusual. Anita had given Raj a small gift a few weeks ago, a book she said he might enjoy. It was sitting on the coffee table, and I decided to take a closer look. Inside the cover, there was a short note written in neat handwriting. It said she admired Raj for his kindness and hoped he would always stay the same. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It felt like she was trying to get closer to him in a way that wasn't normal. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the note. Why was Anita doing all this? What did she really want? I felt like I was living in a nightmare and no one else could see it. Raj didn't notice her strange behavior. He thought everything was fine, but I couldn't ignore the way she looked at him or the way she tried to copy me. I started feeling like I was losing control. Every time Anita came near Raj, I felt a wave of anger and fear. I wanted to protect my marriage, but I didn't know how. Anita was clever. She made everything look innocent, like she was just being friendly. But I knew the truth. She was trying to come between us, and I couldn't let that happen. One day, I decided to go through some old magazines I had kept in a drawer. I used to enjoy reading them, but I hadn't looked at them in years. As I flipped through the pages, I saw a familiar face. It was Anita. She looked younger, but still recognizable. The article was about a famous chef who had been involved in a scandal. According to the story, Anita had once been a rising star in the culinary world, but her career had ended suddenly after she was accused of stealing another chef's recipes. My hands trembled as I read the article. This was the same woman who is now trying to take over my life. She had a history of taking what didn't belong to her. It all made sense now. Anita wasn't interested in Raj because she loved him. She was trying to replace me because she envied the life I had built. I felt a mix of emotions: fear, anger, and sadness. I didn't know what to do with this information, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Anita wasn't just a friendly neighbor. She was dangerous. She wanted everything I had, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I had spent so much time feeling helpless, but now I knew what I was dealing with. Anita wasn't just copying me. She was trying to become me, but I wasn't going to let her win. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what to do next. I couldn't confront Anita directly. She would deny everything and make me look crazy. I couldn't talk to Raj about it yet. He didn't see what I saw. I needed a plan, something that would show everyone the truth about Anita. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance to stop Anita. I didn't know how, but I was determined to find a way. I had to protect my marriage and my life, no matter what it took. The next morning, I woke up with new determination. I had spent so much time feeling like a victim, but now I had a goal. I needed to stop Anita before she destroyed my life. The article I found about her past gave me a sense of power. For the first time, I had proof that Anita wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be. She had a history of taking what didn't belong to her. I decided to gather more information. If I could show Raj and the neighbors who Anita really was, they might understand why I was so worried. I started by watching her more carefully. Every little thing she did felt like a clue. She was careful, always pretending to be friendly and sweet, but I could see through her now. One afternoon, I noticed Anita talking to another neighbor, Mrs. Kapoor. They were laughing and chatting like old friends. It surprised me because Mrs. Kapoor was usually reserved and didn't trust people easily. Anita had a way of making people like her, but I wondered if Mrs. Kapoor saw the same cracks in her perfect image that I did. Later that day, Anita showed up at my house again. She said she wanted to borrow a kitchen tool, something simple like a whisk. As usual, She stayed longer than necessary. She asked Raj about his work and laughed at everything he said. I stayed in the room this time, watching her closely. I could see how hard she was trying to get Raj's attention, how she smiled a little too much and leaned in a little too close. I thought about the article again. Anita had once been a chef who wanted to be famous. She had stolen recipes and lied to people to get ahead. When she was caught, her career ended and she disappeared from the public eye. Now she was here in my neighborhood trying to take something else that wasn't hers. I decided it was time to talk to Mrs. Kapoor. She was one of the most respected people in the neighborhood, and she had known me and Raj for years. If anyone would believe me, it would be her. I went to her house and told her everything I had noticed about Anita. I told her about the article, the way Anita copied me, and how she always tried to be around Raj. Mrs. Kapoor listened carefully, but I couldn't tell if she believed me. She said Anita seemed kind and harmless, but she also admitted that something about her felt too perfect. She told me to be careful and to keep watching Anita. It wasn't the reaction I hoped for, but it was better than nothing. At least someone else was starting to see what I saw. The next day, I decided to test Anita. I wanted to see how far she would go. I told Raj that I was thinking of trying a new hobby, painting. I had no real interest in it, but I knew Anita would overhear me. Sure enough, 2 days later, she showed up at my door with a set of paints and brushes. She said she had been interested in painting for years and thought we could learn together. Her actions confirmed what I already knew. Anita wasn't just copying me by chance. She was doing it on purpose, trying to take over every part of my life. It wasn't enough for her to be around Raj. She wanted to be like me, to become me. I started feeling more confident. Anita's behavior was becoming more obvious, and I knew I could use it against her. I began writing down everything she did, every small thing that seemed strange or suspicious. I kept a notebook hidden in my room, filling it with details about her actions. One evening, Raj and I went to another neighborhood gathering. Anita was there, of course. She wore a dress almost identical to one I had worn a week earlier. She stayed close to Raj, laughing and chatting as if they were best friends. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. I watched her carefully, noticing the way other people looked at her. Some of them seemed impressed by her charm, but others looked confused, as if they weren't sure what to make of her. I decided to take a risk. I brought up Anita's past in a subtle way, mentioning the article I had found without naming her directly. I said I had read about a chef who had copied someone else's work and ruined her career. People started asking questions, and I saw Anita's face change. For the first time, she looked nervous. When we got home, I felt a mix of emotions. I was proud of myself for speaking up, but I also felt scared. I knew Anita wouldn't back down easily. She had worked too hard to create her new life, and she wouldn't let me ruin it. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what would happen next. Anita was starting to lose control, but I didn't know how far she would go to protect her image. I felt a sense of fear, but also a growing strength. I wasn't going to let her win. I had come too far to give up now. The days after the gathering felt tense. Anita's behavior changed, but not in the way I expected. She didn't stop coming around or trying to get close to Raj. Instead, she became more careful. Her visits were shorter, her compliments less obvious, and her actions harder to read. But I knew she was still watching me. I stayed on high alert, making sure to notice every little thing she did. Raj, however, seemed completely unaware. He thought Anita was just being friendly, and I didn't want to push him too hard. I was afraid that if I said too much, he would think I was jealous or imagining things. I needed a clear way to show him the truth, something he couldn't ignore. One morning, I went into the garden to water the plants. I noticed something strange right away. One of my favorite flowers, a bright yellow hibiscus, had been cut. The stem was clean, as if someone had used scissors. I looked closer and saw that a few other flowers were missing as well. My heart sank. I knew Anita had been in her garden the day before. She had been planting the same flowers as me. I tried to stay calm, but anger bubbled inside me. It wasn't just about the flowers. It was the idea that Anita thought she could take whatever she wanted from my life. I decided to visit her house later that day. I needed to see if the missing flowers were there. When I arrived at Anita's house, I saw her in the garden. Sure enough, my yellow hibiscus was planted near her porch. It looked fresh, as if it had been placed there only a few hours earlier. My hands trembled as I stared at it. Anita saw me and waved, her smile as bright as ever. But this time, I didn't smile back. I walked away, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Anita had gone too far. It was one thing to copy my clothes or buy the same vegetables, but now she was taking things from my home. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to find a way to stop her before she caused more damage. That evening, I opened my notebook and started writing down everything that had happened so far. I listed all the times Anita had copied me, from her clothes to her garden. I included details about the article I had found and the way she behaved around Raj. I wanted to create a clear picture of who Anita really was. I also thought about how to show Raj the truth. I needed him to see what I was seeing, but I couldn't just tell him. I needed evidence, something that would make him realize Anita wasn't as innocent as she seemed. The next day, I went to the market and bought a small camera. It was the kind you could hide easily. I placed it near the window that faced our garden, making sure it was pointed at the area where I often saw Anita. If she came near our house again, I would have proof. It didn't take long for the camera to catch something. 2 days later, I checked the footage and saw Anita walking near the garden wall. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then reached over and picked a flower. She held it in her hand, smiling, before walking away. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I finally had proof that Anita was crossing boundaries, but I also felt angry that she had done it again. This time, I decided to confront her in a way she couldn't avoid. That afternoon, I printed a still image from the camera footage. I put it in an envelope and left it on her doorstep. I didn't include a note. I wanted her to see the picture and realize she couldn't hide her actions anymore. The next day, Anita didn't come by the house. She didn't wave when she saw Raj, and she didn't stop to chat with the neighbors. It was the first time in weeks that I felt a small sense of peace. But I knew this wasn't the end. Anita wasn't the type to give up easily. I spent the next few days preparing for whatever Anita might do next. I talked to Mrs. Kapoor again, showing her the picture and explaining what had happened. She seemed more convinced this time, agreeing that Anita's behavior was strange. It felt good to have someone on my side. But even with Mrs. Kapoor's support, I couldn't shake the feeling that Anita was planning something. She had been so bold before, and I didn't believe she would stop just because I had caught her once. I stayed alert, watching and waiting for her next move. One evening, as I was tidying up the living room, I noticed something out of place. A small photo frame that usually sat on the shelf was missing. It was a picture of Raj and me, taken on our anniversary. My heart raced as I searched the room, but the frame was nowhere to be found. I ran to the garden and checked the area near the window. There were no signs of forced entry, but I knew the photo hadn't disappeared on its own. Anita's face flashed in my mind, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She had taken something personal, something that symbolized my marriage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was being pushed to the edge. Anita wasn't just copying me anymore. She was trying to take over my life completely. I didn't know what her next move would be, but I knew I had to act quickly. As I lay awake, I thought about the final steps I needed to take. Anita had crossed every line, and it was time to show everyone the truth about her. I didn't know exactly how it would happen, but I was ready to fight for my life and my marriage. No matter what, I wouldn't let Anita win. The morning after I noticed the missing photo, I woke up feeling exhausted but determined. Anita had gone too far, and I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront her and bring everything into the open. My fear was replaced by a new feeling: anger. She had tried to take over my life, and I wasn't going to let her succeed. I decided to start with Raj. He needed to see what was happening, even if it was hard for him to believe. I showed him the picture from the camera, explaining how Anita had taken the flowers from our garden. I also told him about the missing photo. At first, Raj looked confused, but I could see doubt growing in his eyes. He trusted Anita, but now he was starting to question her intentions. I spent the rest of the morning gathering all the evidence I had collected. I put everything into a folder: the camera image, the article about Nita's past, and the notes I had written about her strange behavior. It was a record of everything she had done, and I was ready to share it with the neighbors. They needed to see who Anita really was. That afternoon, I went to Mrs. Kapoor's house. I explained everything again, this time showing her the folder. She looked through the evidence slowly, her expression serious. When she finished, she nodded and said she would help. Together, we planned a small meeting with some of the other neighbors. It was time for everyone to know the truth. The meeting took place the next evening at Mrs. Kapoor's house. A few trusted neighbors came, including Raj. I felt nervous as I stood in front of them, holding the folder in my hands. But I reminded myself why I was doing this. Anita had manipulated everyone for too long, and it was time to stop her. I began by showing the camera image and explaining how Anita had been stealing flowers from my garden. Then I shared the article about her past, describing how she had copied other chefs' work and lied to get ahead. Finally, I talked about all the small ways she had tried to copy me, from my clothes to my hobbies, and how she always seemed to be around Raj. When I finished, the room was quiet. I could see shock and disbelief on some faces, but others nodded, as if they were finally putting the pieces together. Raj looked serious, and I could tell he was thinking deeply about everything I had said. For the first time, I felt like people were starting to believe me. The next step was confronting Anita. Mrs. Kapoor suggested we invite her to the meeting and let her explain herself. I agreed, even though the thought of facing her made my stomach churn. If Anita was going to deny everything, she would have to do it in front of everyone. When Anita arrived, she looked surprised to see so many people gathered. She smiled her usual friendly smile, but it didn't last long. As I started to show the evidence, her expression changed. Her face grew pale, and she avoided looking at anyone directly. She tried to laugh it off, saying I must have misunderstood her actions, but no one seemed convinced. Raj stood up and asked Anita about the flowers and the photo. For a moment, she hesitated, as if deciding what to say. Then she admitted she had taken the flowers, but claimed it was just a small mistake. She said she had meant to upset anyone and apologized with a sweet smile. But the missing photo was harder for her to explain. She denied taking it, but her voice shook, and I could see the truth in her eyes. By the end of the meeting, most of the neighbors seemed to side with me. They were polite to Anita but distant, as if they no longer trusted her. Raj didn't say much, but I could tell he was seeing her differently now. Anita left the meeting quickly, her usual confidence gone. The days after the confrontation were strange. Anita stopped coming to our house and avoided me whenever she saw me outside. Her cheerful greetings disappeared, replaced by silence. She seemed to realize that her game was over and that no one believed her anymore. Raj and I spent more time together, talking about everything that had happened. He apologized for not noticing Anita's behavior sooner and promised to be more careful in the future. It felt like a weight had been lifted from our relationship. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. One morning, I looked out the window and saw a moving truck in front of Anita's house. She was leaving. I watched as she loaded her belongings into the truck, her head down. She didn't look at me or wave goodbye. I felt a mix of emotions, relief that she was gone, but also sadness for what she had tried to do. She had caused so much pain, but I couldn't help wondering what had led her to act that way. As the truck drove away, I felt a sense of closure. Anita was gone, and my life could finally return to normal. The garden felt brighter, the house felt safer, and my marriage felt stronger. I knew I would never forget what had happened, but I also knew I had learned something important. I had found my strength, even in the face of fear and doubt. Life moved on, and the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual routines. Mrs. Kapoor and I became closer, and Raj and I made plans to redecorate the house, starting with the living room. The missing photo was never found, but I decided to frame a new one, a picture of Raj and me smiling together in the garden. It was a reminder of everything we had overcome and how we had grown stronger together. Looking back, I realized that Anita's presence had tested me in ways I never expected. She had tried to take everything I cared about, but in the end, she had only brought me closer to the people who mattered most. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away.